What if I told you two sisters conquered rock harder than Led Zeppelin, then watched their empire collapse over an open tour bus door? 9 top 10 hits spanning 2 decades. A riff born from Betrayal that became immortal. Then came One Violent Night, when family ties turned into headlines, and the silence that followed split one of rock's most enduring bonds. This is how Heart nearly destroyed itself from within. The story of Heart begins not with music, but with displacement. Anne and Nancy Wilson were military brats, daughters of John Wilson, a former Marine and musician. Their childhood was defined by constant motion. Panama, Taiwan, base after base, where nothing stayed the same except the family and the music that held them together. Nancy later described their Sunday ritual with vivid clarity. "We'd have pancakes and opera. My dad would be conducting in the living room. We'd turn it way up and rock." In a world where home was wherever the military sent them, music became the only reliable foundation. It was the language they spoke when everything else was foreign. When the family finally settled in Bellevue, Washington, the sisters' individual roles crystallized in an unexpected way. In 1963, Anne fell sick with mononucleosis. To keep her entertained during her recovery, their mother bought her a guitar. But Anne never fully connected with the instrument. Nancy, watching from the sidelines, picked it up instead and never put it down. Before we continue, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. The division was perfect and permanent. Anne became the voice, Nancy became the hand. Anne, who had struggled with a stutter and weight problems in high school, found that singing gave her the confidence she'd never possessed speaking. Her voice, powerful and operatic, could command a room. Nancy's fingers on the guitar provided the foundation. But the real transformation came in the early 1970s, when the Wilson family's military foundation cracked. John Wilson retired from the Marines, disillusioned and bitter about what he called the dirty war in Vietnam. This anti-establishment sentiment ran directly into Anne's personal life when she met Michael Fisher, a draft dodger who had fled to Canada to avoid the war. Anne made a choice that would change everything. She followed Michael to Vancouver, British Columbia, joining a struggling band that would eventually become Heart. This was 1970. The counterculture was in full bloom, and Anne was diving headlong into it. Nancy joined her sister in 1974, and the classic lineup finally came together. Anne on vocals, Nancy on guitar, Michael Fisher managing sound, Roger Fisher on lead guitar, who happened to be Nancy's boyfriend, Steve Fossen on bass, and Michael Desrosiers on drums. But here's what nobody saw coming. This lineup contained the seeds of its own destruction. 2 intense romantic relationships, Anne and Michael, Nancy and Roger, running parallel to the fierce sisterly bond. The band wasn't just built on music, it was built on love. And love is the most volatile fuel there is. When success came, it would put unbearable pressure on these relationships. And when these couples inevitably fractured, the band would fracture with them. The structure that made Heart possible was also the trap that would eventually tear them apart. By 1975, Heart had become a formidable unit in the Vancouver rock scene. They signed with Mushroom Records and released their debut album, Dreamboat Annie. The sound was revolutionary, delicate acoustic folk woven together with raw, Led Zeppelin-style power. Nancy's fingerpicking could be gentle and intricate one moment, then explode into electric fury the next. And Anne's voice, operatic, soaring, capable of tenderness and absolute ferocity, positioned them as something the rock world had never quite seen before. Women who rocked as hard as men. Nancy captured their ambition perfectly. "We didn't want to be the girlfriends of the Beatles. We wanted to be the Beatles." The album gained traction slowly at first, but everything changed after Heart secured an opening slot for Rod Stewart's massive concert in Montreal in October 1975. The exposure was exactly what they needed. When Mushroom's US division launched a full stateside release on February 14th, 1976, Dreamboat Annie exploded. It eventually peaked at number 7 on the Billboard 200 and sold over 1 million copies. 2 singles defined this breakthrough era and became instant classic rock staples. Magic Man was Heart's first commercial success, reaching number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1976. The song captured their duality perfectly. innocent yet worldly lyrics about being charmed by a mysterious figure, layered over a complex arrangement featuring prog keyboards, acoustic sections, and squealing electric riffs. It was sophisticated and accessible at the same time, but it was Crazy on You that became their true anthem, even though it peaked lower on the pop charts at number 35. That opening, Nancy's gentle acoustic introduction suddenly exploding into electric fury, is an instant time machine. Heart had arrived, but the real battle was just beginning. The late 1970s brought legal disputes with Mushroom Records that forced Heart to re-record and re-release material, but from this turbulence emerged their most enduring work. In 1977, they released Little Queen, and with it came a song born from white-hot rage, Barracuda. The story behind this song is a perfect example of how betrayal can forge greatness. Ann Wilson revealed that Barracuda was written after a promoter suggested, publicly cruelly, that she and Nancy were engaged in a sexual relationship with each other. It was a vile insinuation designed to diminish them, to sexualize and demean two women who were simply trying to make great rock and roll. Ann was hit by the insult. She felt trapped, betrayed by an industry that was supposed to support them. And she channeled that fury directly into the song's lyrics, which reference the slimeball guy and the whisper game. The resulting track, driven by one of the most iconic, instantly recognizable riffs in rock history, was Heart's ultimate act of defiance. Ann later admitted that the riff was an intentional homage to Led Zeppelin's Achilles' Last Stand, solidifying Heart's reputation as the female Led Zeppelin. Although the song peaked just shy of the top 10 at number 11, its raw energy made it immortal on FM radio. Even today, over 40 years later, that riff still hits like a punch to the chest. But the success was taking its toll. The overwhelming attention focused on Ann and Nancy, Ann later observed, really hurt the men's feelings and made them angry. The squabbling began to fall along gender lines. The romantic relationships that had been part of the band's foundation were cracking under the weight of fame and ego. By 1979, the relationship between Nancy and guitarist Roger Fisher ended. He was voted out of the band. Michael Fisher, Ann's partner and the band's manager, also departed after their relationship dissolved. This was the first major collapse. The structure that had made Heart possible was also the structure that guaranteed its implosion. When love died, the band bled. The 1980s presented a make-or-break challenge. The musical landscape shifted dramatically toward music videos and synthesized pop. Heart, still committed to their hard rock principles, struggled to find their place. Their comeback arrived in 1985 when they signed with Capitol Records and released their self-titled album, Heart. This marked a successful but artistically complicated reinvention. The album became a hit machine, yielding What About Love and Never. The peak of this MTV era dominance came with two consecutive #1 hits. These Dreams in 1986 and Alone in 1987. Heart had conquered two completely different eras, the raw, album-oriented rock of the 70s and the glossy, image-driven MTV world of the 80s. But the commercial triumph came at a cost Ann Wilson felt deeply. It was suffocating, image-wise, she later said. We had always been a real band. Heart was never a construct. The 80s hits were heavily reliant on outside writers and a polished commercial approach that forced the band, especially Ann, into an uncomfortable mold. The fact that their greatest commercial successes came from this pivot created a fundamental divide between the sisters. Ann prioritized the raw, barrier-breaking rock of the 70s. Nancy, who sang lead on their first #1 hit, These Dreams, embraced the commercial necessity of the new era. This creative tension lay dormant for decades, but it was there, festering, waiting for the right catalyst to bring it to the surface. By the end of the decade, Heart had achieved something remarkable. 9 top 10 hits spanning nearly 15 years. They were legends. They were pioneers. They had proven that women could command the rock and roll landscape with the same power as any man. But beneath the surface, the fault lines were spreading. For decades, Heart continued to tour as a legacy act. The sisters maintained their professional partnership even as their personal relationship grew more complicated. the shadow of their volatile internal structure, where romantic partners frequently became band insiders, persisted. And then came August 2016. Hart was touring in suburban Seattle. Anne had recently married Dean Wetter in 2015. Nancy's twin sons, 16 years old, from her former marriage to director Cameron Crowe, were backstage during the show. The teenagers decided to walk around. They were looking inside Anne's new tour bus. According to court documents, they left the door open. Dean Wetter saw this and became enraged. What happened next destroyed everything the sisters had built over 5 decades. The confrontation escalated from yelling to violence. Court documents confirm that Wetter allegedly punched one of the boys in the back of the head before grabbing him by the throat. When the second boy tried to intervene, Wetter allegedly grabbed his throat as well and squeezed to the point he could not breathe. 2 teenage boys, gasping for air, attacked by their aunt's husband while their mother performed on stage. This wasn't a professional disagreement. This wasn't creative differences. This was a husband's hands around the throats of his wife's nephews. This was violence committed against children in the workplace that had been the sisters' shared sanctuary for their entire adult lives. The legal fallout cemented the permanent separation. Dean Wetter pleaded guilty to 2 counts of assault in March 2017. While his sentence of 364 days in jail was suspended, the court imposed probation, counseling, restitution, and most critically, a no-contact order prohibiting him from contacting the boys. The physical violence had replaced sisterly communication with a legal barrier. Hart's 2016 tour concluded, and the band was immediately put on hiatus in April 2017. Fans were stunned. After surviving every challenge, lineup changes, industry betrayal, shifting musical trends, Hart had finally been broken by something far more primal: family violence. The incident happened on a tour bus, the ultimate symbol of their professional life. There was no separation anymore between the personal and the professional. The structure that had always been volatile had finally exploded in the worst way imaginable. The aftermath of 2016 led directly into years of professional separation and personal distance. Anne and Nancy, the sisters who had spent a lifetime bound together by music and family, suddenly walked separate paths. Anne Wilson began touring extensively under the banner Anne Wilson of Hart, focusing on her solo career. Nancy immediately channeled her creative energy into a new project, co-founding the band Roadcase Royale with R&B singer Liv Warfield. They quickly released their debut album, First Things First, in September 2017. During this period, the emotional distance grew. Anne occasionally addressed the rift publicly, attempting to minimize the severity, while simultaneously confirming a deeper, non-negotiable split. She noted that the involvement of the police created a myth of a constantly feuding relationship, but she was more candid about the underlying creative tension that prevented their reunion. Anne explicitly stated, "We just have different ideas for what Hart should be, and we haven't figured out a compromise yet." She articulated the fundamental schism that had its roots in the 1980s commercial pivot. Anne still aimed for Hart to break barriers and rules, embracing the gritty, authentic hard rock identity. Nancy was more satisfied to ride the LA imaging thing and just do legacy stuff. This explanation revealed something crucial. The 2016 assault was the catalyst, but the deep wound was the disagreement over the band's soul, authenticity versus commercial nostalgia. The compromises required for their 1980s fame had curdled into a genuine philosophical divide. The assault gave Nancy the non-negotiable justification to separate, but the distance had been growing for years. For the men who remember Hart from their youth, who bought the albums, attended the concerts, fell in love to these songs, this split hits hard. It's a reminder that even the most powerful bonds can fracture, that success doesn't guarantee happiness, that families can break in ways that can never be repaired. The sisters who once huddled together against the chaos of a military childhood, who found their voices and their power in each other, could no longer stand to be in the same room. Despite the profound drama and the years of silence between the sisters, the music of Hart has proven immortal. Their enduring influence was officially celebrated in 2013 with their induction into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. This moment provided a powerful, albeit temporary reconciliation. The induction ceremony featured the classic 1970s lineup, Anne and Nancy alongside Roger Fisher, Steve Fossen, Michael DeRosier, and Howard Leese, performing definitive tracks like Crazy on You and Barracuda. This performance captured the raw power of their origins. It was a reminder of what they had built together, what they had accomplished when the bond was still strong. Just 3 years later, everything would collapse, but in that moment, Heart was whole again. The impact of Heart stretched far beyond the pop charts. In their hometown of Seattle, their hard rock credentials were never questioned. The leaders of the 1990s grunge movement, Nirvana, Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, were huge fans. As one critic put it simply, they rock. This validation secured their authentic rock status, regardless of their 1980s commercial success. The lasting power of their catalog, from the aggressive defiance of Barracuda to the epic sweep of Crazy on You, continues to dominate classic rock airwaves, sports arenas, and film soundtracks. These songs are woven into the fabric of American culture. They're the soundtrack to memories, to youth, to moments that can never be recaptured but will never be forgotten. Even during the period of profound personal estrangement, Nancy Wilson acknowledged the permanence of their shared artistic creation. The roots are deep, and it's bigger than all the rest of it, because the music and the songs are there in the culture. It's a lovely, steady pillar of power that just exists on its own. Heart's story is a cautionary tale about the internal costs of fame and the difficulty of blending personal relationships with professional ambition. It's about two sisters who conquered the world and then watched their empire crumble over an open-tour bus door and decades of unresolved creative tension. But the final note is one of pride. Their creative legacy endures, defining a generation of rock music. The voices that blended so perfectly on record still echo through the decades, reminding us of a time when two women proved they could rock as hard as anyone. Some bands break, but Heart became a legend. Heart proved that the loudest voices can emerge from the deepest bonds, and that those same bonds can shatter under the weight of success. 9 top 10 hits, 2 eras conquered, a legacy that refuses to fade, but the price was paid in silence, distance, and wounds that may never heal. Where were you the first time you heard Crazy on You? Drop your memory in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more untold stories of rock's greatest triumphs and tragedies.